Nighttime on still waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways. January 6th, Tuesday. Colder night but slightly milder dawn. A few desultory snowflakes fall. Flightless feathers with no wind upon which to dance. Will these small flakes ever get the chance to find the sea? It's freezing, and a night when the moon is in its final quarter. The scent of chimney smoke and frost. The canal is once more glazed with ice, its mottled, scratched surface gleaming dully in the cabin lights. The towpath is brittle hard, and grass cracks underfoot. The swim pools made by winter sun and ducks are freezing over again. And this is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the frozen darkness of a crisp January night. You made it. Happy New Year. How are you? It's a strange old time of year, this, isn't it? And I'm so glad you've come. Outside, the temperature is still falling, and the boat's roofs are beginning to sparkle with frost. So come inside. The cabin is lit by the warm cherry red from the stove, and we're snug and safe. The kettle is on. The biscuit barrel is close by, so settle yourself comfy by the fire, and welcome aboard. The new year has come. Without sign or sound, the world slips past these arbitrary lines that we invest so deeply in. The cradling of our tears, and the fragile spark-like flashes of our hope, and all of our brittle fears. Past, unnoticed, save for the quickening in the bud, the push of new stem, and the incremental return of light. And so the new year now dawns, and its long days stretch out before us, with all its light and shadowed shades. Well, after an autumn and early winter that was really mild, and at times worryingly warm, so far this year we've been experiencing some proper wintry weather. And the new year dawned with some hard frosts, and some local nighttime temperatures dropping to around -7 to -8 degrees centigrade. That's around 19.4 to 17.6 Fahrenheit. That locked land and water in ice, in some places making one indistinguishable from the other. And slowly the ice crept along the canal, its grip tightening, reaching out to the spots sheltered by trees and bridges, where dark pools of water had remained. Swim pools busy with ducks and moorhen, cormorants sometimes joining them. It's interesting, for although these pools offer a much more constricted living space, the normal daily squabbles that often erupt among the ducks when they're out on open water seem to be less. Little groups stand around on the ice of the pool's edge, their webbed feet teetering at the very edge, like swimmers contemplating taking a dip into an icy pool. They seem quite happy to take turns in and out of the water, without any of that frenetic squabbling that often goes on in large groups on less restricted waters. Perhaps adversity creates community. And then, as the days progressed, even these small ice-free spaces began to close up. The only stretch of free-flowing water was down by the bywash of the loch. but even this got progressively slow-moving and sluggish. And then the canal and the boats were completely locked in. On the first day of freeze, a couple of boats crashed through, creating a chaotic ice-scape of crazy paving. The ice sheet wasn't too thick, and it split and shattered without too much trouble. I felt sorry for the first boat, though. It was a holiday hire, with a crew new to narrowboating. And the bridge holes around here are notoriously narrow. Ice never splits in clean, straight lines, particularly canal ice that tends not to freeze evenly. And the ice kept pushing them into one bank or other. It was very early in the morning, and they needed to get the boat and themselves presumably back to the hire wharf. They did well, though. Better probably than I would have done. Although it couldn't have been much fun after the first few minutes, though. However, by the next day, the broken and scarred ice was much thicker, and everything effectively stopped. Frost piled upon frost until it felt like snow. The earth underfoot as solid and as unyielding as the water was. Rooks landed centre stream and stood contemplating this new world of theirs. Pairs strutted around together, carving small circles of footprints on the powdered surface of the ice. Crows can do anything. Crows can walk on water. And for a short time, rooks and a couple of jackdaws became the most common water bird here, the ducks by then having moved further down and away. And from time to time it tried to snow. However, it was never more than a thin scraping of tiny frozen pellets. It lay more securely on the canal than it did in the fields and towpath, forming a smooth white highway of ribbon that cut a straight path through the iron-hard countryside. We remained warm, although these times can begin to test your heating, and at least one nearby boat began to experience problems with their central heating. But fortunately, like us, they have a belts and braces approach and have also a multi-fuel stove. And a couple of boats also began to run out of water. As the water taps had frozen, there was little prospect of refilling their tanks until a thaw came. Lack of water because of freezing can be the most significant problem of this type of lifestyle in winter. And it's why we always keep an eye on the short and medium-term weather forecasts and make sure that our water tanks are filled to the brim before any cold snap. We also institute a very strict water use policy when the freeze comes. It can mean having to wash in cold water to avoid wasting it by letting the hot tap run until warm. Although even here there's a few little tips and hacks that can help. Using the cold water from the hot tap to fill a kettle or some saucepans enables you to enjoy hot water for washing without having to waste any. The water was back on for a couple of days, although it's once more frozen. However, forecasts show some milder nights are expected from tomorrow on, and we have plenty of water. And then, halfway through the week, slightly milder temperatures ushered in a gradual thaw of sorts. Nighttime temperatures hovered around 0, sometimes a degree or so under, but the harsh grip of the freeze had begun to loosen. Ice-pearled branches and metal railings began to drip. Green and browns began to emerge through white, and the canal surface turned a dull, matte, dark pewter. Heavy mist swept fine drizzling spray that melted the frost and snow crust to grey mush. Drifts of rain also fell, lying flat on the frozen land and water. Fields and towpath began filmed with a thin layer of mud under which the ground was rock hard and in places slippery. Walking across the fields began to feel like walking on a concrete floor covered by a cheap, thin carpet. And the thaw was underway. A slow attrition, but it was coming. With the slightly milder air, the winds began to increase. This year, or so far at least, the ice has not sung, just bangs and booms as the Erica fidgets and shuffles against the ice sheet on her moorings. And the unfrozen gap around our hull steadily increased, although never in a linear fashion. Night frosts closed gaps made by the previous day's sun. But the main ice sheets remained. And in most places, the canal appeared largely ice-free until you looked closer, or pushed your boot into the water, or watched the ducks. At one point, about 1/4 of an inch of water lay on the surface. It drove Maggie mad as she tried to drink. She's fascinated by ice anyway, but this was something new. Substantially thinner, the ice still had surprising strength. Large branches and stones thrown onto the canal by children and families at the weekend remained above water. There was something indefinably lonely and forlorn about their appearance. They lie bereft, cast out of place, neither land nor water, waiting for the inevitable happening. Hostages of the elements, held frozen literally in limbo, and non-space. Can branches or stones have a limbo? If so, it seems pretty close to it. Maggie drags a jagged splinter of ice out of one of the bays. It's only a couple of millimeters thick, but it's unyielding enough for me to wrap my knuckles on it without breaking. And then, on Thursday, we were hit by Storm Goretti, the first named storm of the year. There's a lot of media attention about it, and the area where we are currently moored fell within the amber warning zone, with forecasts of high winds and up to 30 centimetres or about 1 foot of snow. It came in the evening. We spent the hours before it arrived checking ropes. The rise in water level was our main concern. But also the stern chimney is prone to high winds, and we needed to make sure that it was secure, along with all the other things we keep on the roof. Initially, following a drenching downpour, heavy flurries of wet snow fell on driving winds, covering the cabin sides of all the boats like cotton wool sticking on a wet chin. However, later, the snow turned to rain, and we woke to flooding pools lying on brown mush. Maggie picked her way through it with cat-like precision. I splodged through in gumboots. And the ice is still holding, although the swim holes are getting bigger. Ducks swim unhindered where the tree canopy covers the water. Once again, the importance of trees and their ability to change the microclimate becomes clearly visible all along the canal. The local bird and animal communities are desperate for these oases of water in the arid tundra permafrost deserts of field and footpath. It's under these trees that the loosening grip of the freeze can first be seen, managed by these wonderful giants who reach up to the sky and under the soil. And the communities that live alongside understand. And throughout this time, my primary worry has been the kingfishers. It needs only a couple of days of hard freeze to wipe out whole families. And I'd almost given up hope of our local visitors. However, Friday morning, I was greeted by one perched at our moorings, eyeing an open stretch of water around the boats. It flew off when it saw me, but arced around. At the moment, once more, there are plenty of good fishing spots for it. The spark of hope flashes kingfisher blue. Thank you It was so lovely to receive all of your messages and comments over Christmas and the New Year. It's always really lovely to hear from you. And I've got a lot of shout outs, so I'm going to try and do them as quickly as possible. And I apologize if I have missed any. Some of my notifications don't always come through, and I can sometimes come across a comment or a message 2 to 3 or sometimes a month later, so I do apologize. But over on YouTube, hello and thank you to Tania Yorgey and of course Taki, and Happy New Year to you, Tania. And also to Mama Moomin, and thank you also to Tony Walker for your recommendation. I am really glad that you enjoyed the story of Bertram Crane, and hello also to Johnny McMahon. And over on Spotify, thank you to Cavachun Charlie and to AK. And AK, I'm so glad that the story left you with such a nice impression and feeling. And on Instagram, hello and thank you to Callie Conway, Anna Vaughan and Orange Cookie, Kaz, Sherry Rauch, Michelle Braniff, Amanda Keynes and Captain Bugwash. And on Facebook, hello to Karen Smith. And Karen, thank you. And I'm so touched by your words. Thank you so much. And also to Rita He and Linda Reynolds Birkins. And I'm so pleased that you enjoyed Bertram Crane, Linda. And to Chris Scholar. Again, I'm really pleased that you're enjoying the podcast, Chris. To Deb Moo Mountford. Thank you, Deb, for your lovely words. I really appreciate them. And to Tracy Thomas. Again, thank you for your kind words about the story, Tracy. And hello to Bill Thomas. Thank you for your concern, Bill, about the breach. And I'm going to be trying to answer your question in a little while in this episode. And also hello and greetings to LJ and of course Bodie and to MJ and Rory. And thank you for your voicemail, Rory, over Christmas. It was lovely to hear you. And also to Margaret. It was lovely to hear from you, Margaret, and I'm so glad that you're enjoying your retirement. And thank you so much for leaving such a lovely review. And talking of reviews, thank you also to Mark. Mark actually lives just a few boats down from us, and Maggie absolutely loves him. So if you're listening, Mark, thank you, and lots of licks from Maggie. And many thanks to Kevin B. That was so kind of you. Thank you. And it's a real pleasure and joy to welcome not just one, but 2 new Lockwheelers to the podcast. So thank you to Anna McKellar and Susan West. I really do appreciate it. So thank you. And thank you to all of our Lockwheelers. And they are Susan West, Anna McKellar, Susan Baker, Mind Shambles, Clare Hollingsworth, Kevin B., Fleur and David Mcloughlin, Lois Raphael, Tania Yorgey, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hinds, Chris and Alan on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Allison on the narrowboat Mukka, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V, Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, the narrowboat Precious Jet, Linda Reynolds Birkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. Over Christmas and the New Year, a couple of listeners contacted me over the horrifying news of the canal breach at Whitchurch on the Mcloughlin Canal. Firstly, to check whether we were affected by it and whether we were okay, and secondly, asking for a bit more information on it. Now, you may have seen some horrifying video of boats being swallowed by what looks like an enormous sinkhole. 3 boats in total were directly affected. 7 more were left stranded, some at acute angles due to the water draining away. But 2 boats were washed completely down into the hole. And as far as I know from the point of this recording, they're still waiting to be recovered. along with another one that did manage to drag it back slightly from the very edge of the brink of the sinkhole. We first heard about it through two vloggers who were actually caught up in the incident, Paul and Anthony from the Narrowboat Life Unlocked vlog. If you want to know more about the breach and the immediate aftermath, I think you can do no better than to go to their YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in the program notes to them. They're extremely informative, as well as providing a very real and very personal account. You can see and feel the shock of what's happening as they video pretty much as it happens. They were literally moored just meters from the event and caught some extremely harrowing footage of one of the boats being swept out into the breach, highlighting just how dangerous it was. It occurred in the middle of the night, and one of the occupants had to jump from the stern of his boat in complete darkness as it was hanging 8 foot in the air, landing on a bank that was in the process of collapsing and pouring in a torrent of thousands of gallons of water down a very steep incline. It was an absolute miracle that no one involved was severely hurt or injured. And it happened on one of the most popular and well-used canals, the picturesque Mcloughlin Canal that branches off the Shroppie or the Shropshire Union and crosses into Wales, where it branches onto the Montgomery and the Mcloughlin canals. It's arguably one of the most photographed and videoed sections of Britain's waterways, featuring the Pontysilfa Aqueduct, the largest aqueduct in Great Britain and the highest canal aqueduct in the world. To answer the first question, in canal terms, we're a long way away from it. So no, we haven't been affected at all by it. The second question is a little bit more difficult to answer, as the causes are still being investigated. Therefore, we're still working very much within the realms of speculation until investigations have been carried out and are published. And as is too often the case, events like these perhaps quite understandably prompt a lot of speculation, but also some really wild claims, accusations, and, to be honest, misinformation and general hot air. And I have to say that, sadly, the Canal and Narrowboat forums on Facebook have, once again, not particularly covered themselves with glory. It's just a real shame, as the incident has predominantly highlighted the very best of the canal community, near and far, in pulling together in times of adversity. But sadly, in any community, you're always going to find the ones and the twos who feel that they have a right for their voice to be heard, no matter how speculative, misinformed, or even frankly malicious. It's just a pity that social media amplifies it. Well, sorry, that's just me getting sidetracked. So let all that to one side. The cause of the breach is still being investigated, and it now seems that it was a breach. The sinkhole into which those two boats plunged in such a horrifying way appears to have been the result of the breach rather than the cause of the breach. There's also some initial suggestions that a culvert that tunnels through the embankment at that point collapsed and, again, was the cause of the collapse. But this seems to have now proven to be not the case. Inspection and videos of the culvert show that it is still sound and undamaged. So the most likely cause, at the moment at least, appears to be a major failure in the embankment itself. And at this point, I just want to address a couple of fairly widespread criticisms of the CRT. Now, the CRT seems to have been exemplary in their response to this event, and everyone who has been caught up with it. And I have been extremely impressed by the lengths that they have gone to in making safe people and boats, and as getting as many as possible back onto the navigation as quickly as possible. And I also know that this has included many volunteers who have given up spare time, and bearing in mind this is over the holiday period, and braved some really atrocious weather. So once again, the CRT volunteers have proven themselves to be an amazing and truly dedicated band of people. Well done. And the CRT personnel also responded with the river and canal rescue to do an amazing job in quickly stemming the breach from both sides and then refilling the drain sections. There's been a few questions floating around about why the CRT responded so quickly to this breach when their response to the breach on the Bridgewater Canal that occurred a year earlier, almost to the day, appeared to be much slower. And some posts even suggested that it might have been because the breach at Whitchurch was because a couple of very popular vloggers were posting material to a worldwide audience. Well, this wasn't true. The Bridgewater Canal is privately owned and therefore not under the purview of CRT. And so the CRT couldn't really get involved until invited by the owners. And the presence of Paul and Anthony from Narrowboat Life Unlocked, together with a couple of other vloggers, was not the reason for the swift response. And another claim that has been made was that this is yet one more example of the result of CRT withdrawing or cost-cutting, cutting back on maintenance. And whilst I do have my own feelings about some of the more recent policy decisions on infrastructure maintenance, it is clear that the safety and integrity of the system for both users and those around has not been radically affected. The CRT regularly inspect all embankments, and this one was reported to have been last visited for inspection in November 2025, so that's just a month or so before the breach happening. And moreover, there is a continuous monitoring of water levels throughout the system, and it was this, in fact, that alerted the CRT to the problems even before the emergency services contacted them. The cause for this incident seems to suggest a more deep-rooted problem than simply a lack of maintenance or the result of cost-cutting. And whilst the actual cause is still yet to be identified, it is looking increasingly likely that the reason lies in a long-standing problem that's associated with Victorian era and earlier embankments. And this concerns rotational soil, which refers to the occurrence of a circular or arc-shaped slide within the embankment. And it's a particular challenge for the maintenance of the safety for rail services as well as canals. It was due to a technique developed in the Victorian times when we were used in the construction of embankments called end tipping, also known as the top-down method. And this was a practice that was adopted to accelerate the progress of the construction of the embankment, prioritizing speed over stability, and involved the running of spoil from cuttings, tunneling, etc., to create the needed slope, either by floating boats along the channel being constructed or latterly wagons running on temporary rails. This soil was just dumped in a fairly loose and uncompacted way. There's a link in the program notes below to an article by A.W. Skempton explaining this procedure in much greater detail. The consequence of this practice of end tipping meant that the structures, the embankments, were often built rapidly using uncompacted and poorly prepared materials. And over the 200 years or so, many of the embankments have undergone a gradual degradation and progressive failure due to a process termed as seasonal shrink-swell cycles. This refers to the expansion and contraction of clay soils, particularly from wetting and drying, and which reduces the soil strength and slope integrity over time. This in turn can exacerbate rotational soil shifts within the embankment and give rise to slope slippage or even collapse. Changes in climate have also increased the occurrences of very dry spells followed by very heavy rain. In fact, the Whitchurch breach followed one such downpour, have also served to heighten this problem. In fact, a report published in August last year by Whitfield Consulting Services argues that data shows that issues relating to slope stability of railway embankments caused by climatic changes have become much greater with an increased risk of failure, and warn rail companies and Network Rail for greater vigilance. So how to deal with this problem is more problematic. For railways, a number of methods have been used that include, among others, geopolymer injection and sinking steel sheet piling into the ground. For canals, there are also a range of techniques to be used, from clay relining, sinking underwater concrete bags, as well as soft engineering that includes coir matting, hazel wattles and reed planting. However, all of this takes time and is very expensive. It's estimated that over the next 5 years, embankment remodelling and repairs will cost Network Rail around £1 billion. This cost is beyond anything that the CRT could cover. And currently, unlike the rail system, the canal system, for a number of significant reasons, is not viewed as a national asset. However, following the Whitchurch breach, Professor Tom Wilson recorded one of the best analyses of the place and importance of canals that I have heard or read, and I've included a link to his video in the notes below, and I think is well worth a view. So, because of the experiences, particularly of 2025, and the trouble and the difficulties faced by those using the canal systems, there's been quite a bit of talk about, well, what does this all mean for the future of the canals? Coming on the back of a year when large sections of the canal had to be closed due to low water levels, and other sections because of infrastructure breakdown, I can't help feeling that we are at a crossroads, or at least at a point where life on the canals is about to change, or perhaps is even beginning to change. And it's probably far too early to be certain. And a couple of years of gentle weather and good luck may restore some confidence back into the boating community and the boating world. However, I know that if I had booked my main holiday to hire a boat to cruise the canals, only to be told that the canal was closed and I wasn't going to be able to do that, I'm going to think twice about doing it again next year, no matter how good the weather forecast might be. And the hire companies themselves must have been hit hard this year, and are going to be really hoping for some really nice, kind years ahead to help them get themselves back on their feet. However, even private boats, leisure or liveaboard, have also been affected by this. I personally know of a couple of boaters who have been unable to return to their home mooring and are having to winter elsewhere, with the extra financial burden that is putting upon them. And furthermore, I'm also aware that when away from our home mooring, the thought is becoming more prominent in my mind about what happens if a major failure occurs. For example, the closure of a lock for a couple of months, which again has happened this year. Will I be able to get back? And simply just saying, well, I'm going to find an alternative route around it is becoming more and more of a challenge because, again, of unplanned closures. The possibility of becoming completely stuck and then requiring to be craned onto a lorry and travel by road is becoming a worrying reality. I'm also beginning to wonder how many owners of leisure boats who would normally take their boat out for 4 to 6 weeks in the summer will decide that it's simply just not worth the risk, and the current realities are just getting a bit too much for them. And again, I know personally a couple of owners who simply haven't been able to go out anywhere this year because of closures. And this leads me to wonder how many boats are going to be up for sale, and also who will buy them, now that the dream of drifting in this carefree manner around the network is becoming a much harder to realize. And I'm also concerned for the itinerant canal traders who rely on a regular schedule of canal fairs and markets. Now, I'm not saying that this is the end of the canals or life on the canal, and I certainly don't want to frame it in those terms. In fact, I think that it's far from it. I just think that it's going to be different. Sections of the canal are becoming more frequently unnavigable. More unplanned closures means that the old idea of sitting beside the cabin fire in the depth of winter and poring over canal maps to plan the year's adventures is not quite so practicable or realistic. Just watching the vloggers who are constant cruisers repeatedly having to adapt and change their plans is a testament to that. I guess what I'm saying is that nothing is as certain as it was. That seems to be the mantra for the 21st century, doesn't it? Adapt and being prepared to change, finding the new flow, I think is the key. In many ways, that is what life on the canals typify. And it's what attracts so many of us to this life. Maybe eventually canal life will be more about the quality of living on the canal rather than about using the canal for mobility. Maybe it's a chance to rework our relationship with the canal. And I know only too well that siren lure of nomadism and a constantly wanting to see round the next corner. However, the canal can too easily become just a means to the end of meeting some deeper, more complex need. And we end up skating on its surface like those rooks on the ice. Visitors just passing through on the breath of chance and opportunity. So perhaps this is a chance to recheck our compasses. To slightly misquote an idea from Ken Jolly, to become a people who don't just pass through this world of water and towpath on a boat, but who actually find a way to become part of it, to belong to it, to meet the canal with open hands, not only with a hand tightly closed round the tiller. I'm not sure. As I say, maybe a couple of good years will reset everything. Maybe that would be a good thing. I don't know. But I do have a shrewd feeling we're at the point of transition between an older world and its ways and expectations and a new one, in which we need to discover newer ways of approaching and doing things, or maybe rediscover even older ways. That we're entering a new phase in canal life, one that offers both new excitements and experiences as well as challenges. And the one remaining constant is that canal life teaches you one main thing, and that is, whatever the challenge, it is possible to adapt and change to meet its demands. And on that note, this is the narrowboat Erica, signing off for the night and wishing you a very warm, restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature outside -3.8 degrees, inside 21 degrees. Humidity 96%. Dew point -4 degrees. Wind direction east-southeast. Wind strength 3 miles per hour. Barometric pressure 1020.7 rising. Cloud cover 44%. Cloud ceiling, 19,500 feet. Precipitation, nil. Moon phase, 47.5% last quarter. Day length, 8 hours, 3 minutes. Sunset, 16:16. Sky casting, 8